Hi everyone, so here I am at home tonight, so I just wanted to share a little bit of teaching tonight with you all, and I've got my wife just across, she's over here listening to me as well, so she's just going to be listening and giving me some feedback as I share this little message with you. So this is one that I've been wanting to share for quite a while, and in fact I think it's a very important message. It's one that I've been working on for quite a while. And it's a teaching that I've been considering and putting together as a bit of a teaching series for over a year now, and it's something that I was always wondering about as a as a Christian and particularly as a new believer was, if Noah's flood was real, what started it? And so the question was, what was the thing that made Noah's flood happen? That was something that I always wondered about, because if it was such a cataclysm and it rained for 40 days and 40 nights and the earth was flooded and it was all this big catastrophe, what was it that set that thing off? And so it's only been in the last little while that I had a really good look, with COVID and being stuck around the place and not really being able to travel anywhere or do anything, that I started really getting stuck into the Word to have a little look at that particular question and what it was that was the trigger event to the flood. Now, I had a little look in the Scriptures, and you can turn there with me if you like. So it's Genesis chapter 7 and verse 11. So Genesis 7:11, easy scripture, remember 7:11. If you like going, very good sandwiches there if you're on the road. 7-Eleven's excellent. The Slurpees and all that are very nice. Anyway, but moving right along. So Genesis 7:11 is the moment that it describes the flood of Noah beginning. And it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. And so in this one moment, the cataclysm of the flood begins suddenly. It's a very sudden event. And the interesting thing that I find about the flood was that nobody repented. There was no public panic. There was no scare. There was no people begging Moses to get on board the boat. There was none of that. The Bible records nothing of that. Moses hopped on the boat, waited for a week before this event took place, and no one came. Nobody came to the flood. No one came to the ark. No one was banging on the side, oh Noah, can we come in? There was none of that. The flood happened with a bang. It happened very suddenly. And the Bible describes it here that the fountains of the great deep burst open. Now, that is the first thing that's mentioned. And it's a part of the story that I've never heard teaching on, never heard anyone talk about. I heard a Jewish teacher once teach about this, and they went into more detail about that moment. They talked about how the fountains of the great deep were smashed and shattered. Now, they describe a much more violent event than what is traditionally talked about in the story of the flood. But what's happening when you dig into this, the fountains of the great deep, this is the New American Standard that I'm reading, and the other versions render it similarly, but it's talking about a moment that the fountains speak of the source, or the upwelling of a thing. And so the fountains of the ocean is speaking about something that's like at the very bottom of the ocean, that is somehow being broken to pieces. And so if you then can upscale your imagination to imagine what it is that the Bible is describing here, is that the very foundations of the ocean, which is the seabed, is shattered and smashed in an instant. And it's describing that the fountains of great deep burst open. So they were struck with such force that the seabed was smashed to pieces. I imagine it's like a frozen lake that someone's thrown a big rock into, and it's shattered and smashed the ice. But that's what I imagine is happening to the seabed as it's described here. And then immediately following that event, the Bible tells us that it rains non-stop for 40 days and 40 nights. I remember as a young man, I had a very vivid, scary dream when I was at Bible college that I saw the flood of Noah. And the rain that fell in that dream that I saw was like standing under a waterfall. It was so heavy, and in fact, in my dream, the rain was falling in the area where I live here on the Central Coast, and many of the buildings around here have flat roofs, and the rain fell with such force and with such weight and was so heavy that these flat roof buildings, the roofs were collapsing through, and the buildings were collapsing under the weight of water. It was so full on. The event was so tremendous, and in fact, cars were washing down streets as a result of this rain that was falling. But it was like a picture that God showed me in the modern day of what that kind of flood of Noah would have looked like. But corresponding to the rain was this previous trigger event that describes the oceans and the foundations of the oceans being shattered. So then I began to think, well, what could have caused such a cataclysm to have happened? And then I realised that there's only really one type of event that could have caused something like that to have happened, which would be some kind of debris falling from space that has shattered into the earth, like come crashing through. And Hollywood's given us lots of examples in movies of things like this, like the Armageddon movie, and then there was Deep Impact, and then there was more recently that movie Greenland, which has come out, and that's on the streaming platforms you can watch now. And they're all kind of silly and interesting, but they're describing a potential scenario. The Earth could be struck by some big meteor smashing into the Earth and causing tremendous carnage. And so that Greenland one was quite interesting, the way they had shown some of the pictures. But the Bible is describing this type of event. But what I think it's describing is something actually even probably worse than any of those movies have pointed out, because they're only ever talking about one comet or a few chunks of ice or whatever. But I think what the Bible's actually pointing at here is more like a hailstorm than a single impact event. Because there is a lesser known verse in the book of Habakkuk, where the prophet Habakkuk is actually prophetically speaking about this flood event. And you can find this in Habakkuk chapter 3 and verse, let me just quickly see, verse 11. So this is Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 11, where it says, verse 10. It says, "The mountains saw you and quaked, the downpour of waters swept by. The deep uttered forth its voice, and it lifted high its hand." So it's describing again the deep. The deep is Bible language for the ocean. The deep, the deep is lifted high. And then it says, "The sun and the moon stood in their places, and they went away at the light of your arrows, and at the radiance of your gleaming spear. And in indignation you marched through the earth, and in anger you trampled the nations." In other versions it actually mentions how you threshed the nations. But what's interesting is here in this moment, describing prophetically the flood, it's talking about arrows in the plural sense, and speaking about God's gleaming spear. And what's very interesting is when we look at events like I think it was 2011, 12, 13, somewhere there was an asteroid that struck through the sky in Russia, and it was captured on multiple dash cams and security cameras, and it was a very spectacular event. But what you notice in the video footage is these streaking, gleaming streaks of light through the sky that match perfectly what the prophet Habakkuk is describing, at the radiance of your gleaming spear, and at the and speaking about these arrows, the arrows that he describes here in the verse, the light of your arrows. And so it's talking about spears and arrows, but they match that picture that the eyewitnesses saw as this debris is falling through space. So that's what I discovered in Scripture. Also, interestingly, Jesus mentions there in the New Testament that as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man, and it's describing many similarities to the events of Noah's day that will be taking place at the end when he returns. And so I thought, well, okay, so that's cool. That's what the Bible says. That's very interesting and awesome. But surely if such a cataclysm had taken place, that there would be some kind of evidence to, that we could still see. And there'd be evidence that we could look at now in satellite imagery and stuff like that the ancients would never have had the opportunity to see. And so I want to show you some of that stuff. So bear with me. I'm just going to try using this software that I don't know very well. I'm going to try and show you some of this evidence. So just bear with me. Hopefully this is all still working. Okay, so here we are. So this is the Earth, and so hopefully I should be still with you. Now, here we have, magnificent Australia. Now, the first thing that I saw when I started looking for some of the evidence of, this, debris that matches what the Bible described, is I was looking in the Sahara Desert, and the first thing that I saw was this strange-looking structure deep in the Sahara. Now, it's actually known as the Richat structure. You can see there on your screen. And scientists are a little bit perplexed as to what this particular thing is. Now, what I think has happened is that, now remember, the flood took place over about a year. So we have the flood waters rained for 40 days and nights, and then the flood covered the earth for 6 months. But then the Bible describes a period of the flood waters going down. Now, that only took about another 6 months for the waters to go down, or maybe even only 3 months. But then over the rest of the period, the earth is drying out, and the flood waters are receding, the Bible tells us. But what I think has happened is that, based on this idea of this impact theory that I'm sharing with you now, is that there was this hailstorm of debris falling from the sky. There was an initial series of very, very big bangs that hit the earth. This has a bearing on why we have our circles are measured in degrees. We have a 360-degree circle, which I believe was calculated from the original 360-day year, which the calendar was built on prior to the flood. But now our year has been stretched slightly to a 365.25-day year because of the kinetic force of the debris that struck the earth and actually changed the orbit of the earth and stretched out the period of time it takes for the earth to make a full lap of the sun. But what we have here is what I would call a secondary impact, so not one of the first big ones that hit the earth, but one of the much smaller ones that struck later. And so the earth is drying out, but it's still a big sloppy slurry of mud and mess. And something still fairly significant has struck the earth and left us with a 40-kilometre wide crater, which looks like where you might have thrown a rock into a slurry of different coloured layers of concrete or something, and then as it's dried out, it's left this very clear series of rings. But like I said, the scientists are a little bit stuck as to what has caused this particular thing, because they don't really believe in Noah's flood. And the neat thing is we can actually lay the map over on its side, and you can see that even with that, all the colours there's not really that much in the way of hills to go with the impact. It's a very slight rise there, but you can hardly see anything because the mud was so soft and sloppy when this particular thing struck that it all just settled back down again to a fairly flat kind of surface. But what we're left with is the change of the colours that was left over as the earth was drying out. So that was the first one that I saw, which I thought was pretty cool because it was just like a perfect match to what the Bible described. And so then I started looking around in other places, and so I noticed that over here in Egypt there was several other strange looking, fairly obviously circular kind of impressions in what is now very hard, rocky, baked dry desert. And so we've got a very clear circular kind of range of hills here, which would match quite neatly a reasonably large whack from something having fallen from space. It's about 12 kilometres across there. Right beside it we've got another one, and then another one. And what I noticed as I started looking was that these chunks of debris falling through the atmosphere are they break apart, and then you end up with this bit of a splatter of multiple pieces falling. And so this eastern part of Egypt is pock-marked by these circular kind of now very much dried out and hardened circular impact marks. And so that was like, I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Okay, so that's a match. Then I began looking around. Saudi Arabia has some other interesting ones. Some say that they are caused by volcanoes. Maybe they are, but they're certainly a match to this splatter crater type event that I'm running through with you now. They're all over the place there in Saudi Arabia. And I thought, okay, well, that's cool. So there's lots of that type of stuff there. And then, so I kept looking. So I'll show you some more of these that I found around the world. They're not just there in Africa and all that. The US has got an absolute mile of these type of phenomenon in the States. This is North Carolina, is covered in this, again, like a hailstorm type of effect. And you can see how you got all this, well, this is just one, okay? There's Lake Wackamow. And but just north of there, you come into this weird area of multiple circular lakes that looks like somebody has picked up a handful of rocks and thrown them into a big sheet of mud, and you can see how they overlap each other for miles and miles and miles and miles, again matching this idea of just debris striking the earth and just ploughing through this. This is again secondary type impact. So these are ones that would have come in the months as the Earth's surface is drying out, but still very sloppy. And you can see how the atmosphere saves us from lots of this type of debris from hitting the ground, but that only works for the little ones. And so the big ones have still got enough mass that they'll come falling through and actually strike the ground and leave tremendous damage behind. But all the more so when the earth is very soft and sloppy, like it would have been as it's drying out from the flood. And so often these areas that are very flat, they'll show up the evidences of these splatter marks quite well. So that's the North Carolina field that's there. I don't know if anybody's got a particular name for that. I'm just calling it the North Carolina field. There's another couple of rippers up in Canada. This one here, another big circular impact crater, again bearing in mind the earth was very soft at this time. This René Levasseur, I don't speak French very well, island, again matching that perfectly circular impact crater, a perfect match to a secondary type impact from this post-flood world. 60 kilometre diameter, that one. It's pretty significant. Nearby in northern Canada, there's another couple up here. You can see a pair that is obviously broken up as it hit the atmosphere. You've got another, this one's interesting with the inner ring and the outer ring, and it's got its friend right beside it there, which is another neat match to it. And so that's quite interesting. And you've got Hudson Bay here is quite interesting as well. You can see how it's got a very neat circular edge to it, and with these heaped kind of circular debris, which is now turned into a series of islands. Right there, again matching, that would have been a much larger impact. Let me just measure that one for you. So that one there, hang on, let me try that again. Alright, so that's 440 or 460 kilometre diameter. That's quite a large one. The northern hemisphere, these far northern sort of Arctic places have got heaps and heaps of smaller type debris fields. They're covered in these circular splatters all over it. These may have been from a later event that took place in the maybe in the years or even centuries after the flood. There is lots of evidence of frozen woolly mammoths and stuff up here in Siberia that were snap frozen all of a sudden, and this would match another ice. Like a huge ice debris storm that would have come crashing down and just snap frozen the earth in the centuries after the flood. But you can see how these northern parts here are absolutely pockmarked like a hailstorm with these small lakes and these, again, circular little spots everywhere. But again, a perfect match to another subsequent, like a hailstorm type event taking place. But that was probably, again, in the years following the flood. But what I wanted to show you was, there's a couple here in Australia that I quite like to show people as well. Up here in Queensland, there's an impact crater up near Rockhampton. Where is that one gone? I always get lost with this one. It's quite obvious once you find it. There it is. So there, where's that one just inland? Is it Bundaberg or Rockhampton? I can never remember. Bundaberg, there you go. So this is another one. So again, matching that, the earth still being very soft and something is struck. You can actually see in this one, you can see the centre. There's like a centre to the crater, you can see. and it's a slightly elliptical shape to the circle. So that's describing something that's come and struck on this angle here. This one's only about 8 k's across, I think, from memory. Let me measure that one for you. 6 kilometres across. So again, a secondary impact there in Queensland. The other thing that's really interesting in Australia, there's heaps of these secondary impacts. Oops, sorry, what have I done now? Get that back to a 2D view. There's heaps of this type of stuff in Victoria. So we've got loads and loads of these type of strange little circular lakes all over Victoria and South Australia, completely covered in them. And see, nobody looks at this stuff. This is without considering, the events around the flood. No one really looks at this stuff. But I remember when I first started considering, I thought there is so much evidence to support this. It's amazing. And so you can see here in Victoria, just dozens and dozens of these lakes. Again, a perfect match to, a raining down of pieces just falling to the ground and just leaving. I mean, it looks like the moon when you start considering, wow, something has hit the ground here. It's, and some larger, some smaller. But you can see these lakes are not even actually really connected to anything. They're just all there, as if they're just appeared out of nowhere, which they kind of have. You see all these funny little circular lakes everywhere, all over the place. Another one here, which was quite an interesting cluster that's hit the ground here. So that's in sort of Victoria, South Australia. But probably my favourite of these particular craters, and the most scariest ones, are these ones here. This is off the southern tip of Argentina. And you can see here we have a series of probably about 5 or 6 overlapping, tremendously large circular impacts. And what I've often done with this is, if I do a little control print screen, where's my print screen button? There it is there. So just bear with me. So if I go Control V. Alright, so what I can do is I grab a little circular overlapping tool, and you'll see if I just lay these little circles over the top just to help the visual, you can see, and there's a ring of islands you can just see here, just a ring around this one. I'll just put that one there, enlarge it slightly. But there's a ring of perfectly circular islands to match that one. There's another one here, not quite as obvious, you should be able to see it though. I'm just overlaying that one there. And then there's another one here, you can still see the center point of that one. And there's probably a couple of others. I suspect there may be another here and possibly another here, just based on the shape of the ground. But this is but these ones here in the between Antarctica and Argentina are what I would call primary impacts. These are some of the very first that would have struck the earth. This is what the Bible's describing when the fountains of the great deep were broken apart. This is exactly the type of description that the Bible's giving us, and it's a long way from where the ark came to rest too. So it's almost half a world away from where the ark came to a stop up in the mountains in Turkey there. But as you can see, these are humongous. So if I go back to the Google map, bear with me. All right, so there's the Google map again. We can actually measure the diameter of that, and that's 1,138 kilometres across. So yeah, like I said, guys, I just wanted to share this with you. It's something that I've been working on for a while. Once I saw the evidence to back this all up, I was very encouraged. I just thought, well, I think it's something that needs to get out there. I think it's something that the body of Christ needs to know about. Because when the evidence matches the word, it's always a good thing. So I just want to encourage you all with that. And the Bible is true, and it's not just sort of mystically and spiritually true. It really is actually true. And I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of a show and tell that I've had for you tonight. So those references was from Habakkuk 3:11 and from back in Genesis. Where was I? Genesis chapter 7, verse 11. So you can look those up yourself. And as I said, that's just on Google Earth that I was showing you those satellite images. You can look them up yourself. It's very easy to see. You'll see all that evidence for yourself. And there's lots more of that type of impact, type of creators all over the earth that you can look up yourself. Anyway, thanks guys. Leave me some comments if you like, and thanks for watching. We'll catch up next time. Bye for now.